so we are here. This is really cool. It just so happens that we are in the 12th week. It was not an original intention. We just ran out of time last week to really start looking at the overview of the Torah. So it is interesting that we are now at week 12. Interesting about that. It is also something I do believe that we should spend this entire session looking at what we've already covered, as well as some other materials that are as well as like some other things that are in later sections of the New Testament, but that tie in with what we have already read. We're also going to be bringing in some Apocrypha today. We are going to be looking at First Enoch. And maybe also mention Jubilees, but we're not really going to dive into that because Jubilees has different subject material. But the point that we're going to be talking about is kind of the overall worldview of the scribes around the time, but a couple hundred years before Jesus, maybe even leading up to Jesus. And we're going to start looking at some really interesting passages. Nothing really new that we're going to talk about today, but it's definitely going to be a solidification of the things we have been talking about. One thing I did want to talk about that was really cool, we did mention it before, I kind of glossed over it though. It has to do with Genesis 4. So if you want to, go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Genesis 4:1. I will go ahead and share the screen. And pardon me, I'm full of hiccups today. Now, as you know, we like to use Hebrew. So in the first verse here, this is about the birthing of Cain. And it talks about what Eve said here. So can someone read whatever version they have, Genesis 4:1. Can you actually just read it aloud? I don't care who it is.
Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man."
All right, perfect. And so, like, with the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. My version says, with the Lord's help, I have produced a man. Anyone else have a slight variance of that? Okay.
Yeah, Joel, I have. It says, I have acquired a man from the Lord.
Okay, so what version is yours? The old King James? Or just King James?
I don't remember. Give me a minute. I got several of them here. This is the, I'm looking for it.
Yeah. I'm sure it's
I'm not
King
sure.
James. Or something
King James,
literal. It's definitely literal. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely literal. Now,
yeah,
there's actually...
the New King James.
Okay. So there is actually debate on this word here with I have acquired. Actually, this book that I've been reading called The Unseen Realm, I actually read a section about it today. But I'm not going to talk about this word in particular right now. I do want to look at this one here. This word is a very fascinating word. There is a debatable relation between that word and this word. But it looks identical. There's some debate on whether or not they truly are linked. It is spelled and pronounced in very much the same way. They do separate whenever you add like pronouns to them. But this one here, let me explain a little bit of grammar here. So Hebrew does have a word for the, and the word for the is this. So it says, and Adam, it literally means and the man. And so this actually does mean the. When you use a name or, let me try to find an example of the same word. Oh, I know what to do. It'll be Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So notice this word here, it's the same word as before. And then you have the word the after that. And what this is a direct object marker. It tells you what the subject is, especially if it is a definite object. So it has to be definite. It can't be indefinite. For example, so God created. So remember we said that verbs usually come first, and then it's the subject. So you don't have that word here because this is the subject. So what did he create? He created the heavens. So he uses that word there. The Bible uses that word there to say, okay, the next word is definite. And then it also says the next word is definite. So the same thing happens. A supreme definiteness is a name. That's a proper noun. And then there's even more definiteness when you have a pronoun. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong section here. So if we go back to Genesis 4, if you say that Adam knew Eve, well, so this is the subject. This is the man. So the man knew, or we already talked about the implications of knowing. And then we have the direct object marker, and then you have Eve. So this is a name, so this is definitely the direct object. Now, here, when it comes here, I have acquired a man. So it's interesting that, okay, I have acquired, but there is no direct object marker because this is a general term. Notice it says a man and not the man. This is another term for man. It's not Adam, but remember there are two words for man. But anyway, this word here then does not have a direct object marker meaning, and it's usually translated as with. It's usually translated as with here, and it's in concordance with 854. It's a preposition, definitely a preposition. It has something to do, like it usually means when you have something that is like at your side. Now, there is so much going into this word here, but there is a general consensus that when it says, I've acquired a man with Yahweh, that means that, okay, either with his help, that's why we have the helping implications here in 4:1, with his help that I've been able to acquire a man. Another possibility, and this is a big one here, and this one I've heard a lot, is that this word means on the same playing field as. Meaning okay, so remember that we talked before how there is no God besides Yahweh. And that means on his equal playing field. And this word here can potentially mean on an equal playing field. And so what this means that in this interpretation, she is being arrogant here. That, okay, Yahweh made man. He made Adam and Eve. Now I have made man. And this is seen in many schools of thought. It's seen as a very arrogant remark. Notice, however, when she gives birth to Seth in verse 25, can anyone read what they have in verse 25? I'm sorry. Yeah, 25.
Adam lay with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son, and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him.
Mm-hmm. So this is interesting here, that you have the word, thank you, by the way, Seth, and the play on words here has to do with this one's soul. And you have this here means like to grant, or to, like it says here in the English, it says has appointed. So the appointed one would be Seth. And instead of her saying, I have made a man at the same level of God, here it's clear that she said, God has granted me another in place of Abel, who was killed by Cain. And it's really cool to see that this whole thing here, from the beginning, the very first verse, all the way to the very end of the chapter, we have the contrast there. And I thought that was something of note. And we talked a lot about this in earlier sections about like how God kind of like is known to break people down. Similar to like when you're looking at Genesis and you have like oh my goodness, like someone, like for example, Joseph getting broken down because he goes and tells his brothers, hey, look at what I've been doing. or like, well, not look what I've been doing, but look at what dreams I've been having. And then over time, like you get like they're broken down over time. And then you have, sorry, the video here is acting really weird, so it's kind of distracting me. Hold on 1 second. I know it works well when it is uploaded. It's totally fine. But like when I'm talking and it's like breaking like that, it totally catches my eye the wrong way. But like with Joseph, like he starts with this arrogant approach, and then God breaks him down over those many years. Same thing with Jacob, although Jacob kind of fights the whole way, which is why we have Israel, which means the one who struggles with God, or he has struggled with. Or he will struggle with. It's also a potential future implication. Then you have oh my goodness, we've covered so many. Oh, like with Moses, for example, how he was made humble from his high position, and then even when he struck the rock, remember he put himself on the same equal playing field as God, and God said no way. And but he did have the grace of allowing Moses to look at the land. Oh, forgot to mention, by the way, when we looked at the end of Deuteronomy, and it said that Moses died at the age of 120 years, you better believe that that has an implication of the 12 tribes. There is no doubt about that. And also, so yeah, and God took him in a similar sense, I guess you could say, with Enoch. Because the language that was presented at the very end of last week's lesson had to do with he was still virile, he was still able to, hold on 1 second, 1 second. All right, guys, so we were just reviewing the section at the end of Deuteronomy where you have, yes, the 120 years has to do with the 12 tribes. Also, his virility. And the moisture of his eyes, it has to the look of his eyes. It meant that he still had plenty of life left in him, but God decided to take him as kind of definitely a punishment for striking the rock on an equal playing field, just like what we were looking at with Eve. And this often happens whenever you see something, and we're going to be covering this a lot when we're in the history books. It will be, there's going to be a lot of equating oneself with God, and God says, no way, Jose, and brings them down. That's a common theme that we will definitely be looking at later. Also, before we go any further, as we are reviewing the Torah today, we are going to be stepping in to the prophets, which is interesting but we will get into more what the prophets cover. But we will not be looking at the Old Testament the way that the Old Testament in Christian tradition is ordered today. We will be actually looking at it from the traditional perspective, which is the Torah, the prophets, and then you have the writings. The prophets are arranged into 3 sections. You have the history ones, which are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And Samuel and Kings are considered single books. And then you have Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, and then you have the 12, and that's considered the prophet, all of that. And then after that, you have the writings, which are just everything else in a different order, and it ends with Chronicles. We will be talking about that more toward the end of what we're doing today, but I did want to kind of like give a preview of what we're going to be covering. And actually, today we will be looking at some of Psalms, but that's not right now. Also, okay, so we got that covered. Let's go ahead here and let me see what I got for today. Okay, yeah. All right, before we go any further, was there anything that anyone wanted to talk about, discuss, anything that seemed unclear that you weren't able to bring up before, from anything we have covered thus far? Because we're going to be talking about some interesting stuff today, and it will be a discussion. So, any questions, anything like that you want to bring up? There is, hold lot to do. So I'm going to review what we have covered already. And believe me, there will be time to talk about the giants at the end. So, so to review, when you look at Genesis 1, what we have covered is quite clear when you look at the depictions that are provided in Genesis 1 as well as in Genesis 2. And that the order of the arrangement in the creation of the world does not happen in the same order. We really went into detail about this. So if you have any questions on that, please refer to the previous times when we talked about this. We did go pretty slowly over that. Another thing, when it comes to this, so basically remember that this the creation story that we have in the Bible today is a slap in the face to all the surrounding cultures of the time. We talked about the different creation stories of Canaan, as well as other parts of Mesopotamia. We talked about Egypt. We've even mentioned Greece, which by the time Jesus was around, he definitely knew these stories, and how the creation story was a big slap in the face. Like how the Bible does it is a big slap in the face to the other cultures. Just so happens, as a side note, it's funny. My parents put me I'm listening to the Bible Project Bible Project podcast 1 week at a time. I'm just listening to it as I do my chores and stuff. And it's funny because my parents told me that they're recently, in the last couple of weeks, have been releasing things saying, does the creation story of Genesis have anything to do with the surrounding creation stories of other cultures? And I thought that was hilarious. I thought it was so funny because we've already been talking about that, and it's really been a joy doing that. Another thing we did look at was how the creation story in Genesis took place. And this is a segue into what we're going to be talking about. So remember, it's you have the waters, the chaos waters, and then you had all these different things where out of the chaos waters you had the dry land, you had the separation of the sky. The sky was seen as a hard dome that had seas above it, that the birds populated the seas above, the fish populated the seas below. You had, and the earth was supported, and in later sections of the Bible they talk about 4 pillars that hold up the earth, which is, and we also talked about God sitting on a footstool, and how footstools usually had those 4 legs. Sometimes they were a square or a circle, and that's their perception of what the world looked like. Then you have all these, oh my goodness, we have so many. Oh, that's one thing I did want to mention. So when you have the dome like that, that's another, when you're talking about the creation of the tent of meeting, as well as the tabernacle and later Solomon's temple, a lot of imagery is shared when it comes to the creation story. An example is the tent of meeting having the things that you push back, the doorway that you push back, it kind of hangs down. It's symbolic of the dome of the sky and how heaven is breaking through, and how it's just really, really cool stuff. When you look at the menorah, the lamp posts, they are made to look like trees, similar to the Garden of Eden. The whole story of the Bible is getting back to the Eden of Genesis 1 and 2 and 3. And so that's really, what we also talked about the concept of brandishing swords. We will soon be talking about that next week when it comes to Joshua. When you brandish a sword, and if it's an angel being depicted as brandishing a sword, it is 100% God, no doubt about it. Every time you see a brandished sword in Scripture and an angel is holding that sword, that is God in a physical form. You also have, then you have flame. Flame can either be destructive or productive, or a sign of that you shouldn't cross things. So an example is the flaming sword. But God's presence is also depicted as a fire. When you have the fire going below, descending onto Mount Sinai, but not consuming it. When you have the fire that is not consuming a tree, when you have but then you also have the fire of judgment, which is upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Usually fire is equated to God's everlasting presence and his eternal judgment. And that's a very, very common theme. When at night, when the cloud was moving, by nightfall, that cloud had turned into a pillar of fire. And the closer you got to that pillar of fire, the more purified you had to be. And the reason is, if you had any impurities, you would have been whisked away. And it wasn't just, but God loved his people so much that he told them, okay, to be able to approach me, because otherwise I will incinerate you, and I don't want to incinerate you. That's a common misperception when we look at it from modern eyes. It's like, oh, he was just ready to kill anyone. No, he really loved them, and he's like, if you want to approach me, you have to match all these requirements, or else I will incinerate you. So that's the whole concept of the fire there. Another thing, too, is water. Remember that water in and of itself is not considered bad, especially when it's in a stream or in some sort of a river, like a larger river. It's usually considered good in that sense. When you have Eden imagery, you have the 4 rivers that are within the Garden of Eden. These 4 rivers are like, they I guess you could say they replenish the earth, or like they nourish the earth. Then you also have, but you have to be aware though, anything beyond the scope of the firmament. So you remember, there's the firmament of the skies and the firmament of the ground. Anything beyond that is considered chaos. And that means any sort of sea, ocean, anything like that where there are raging waters, those are constantly and continuously referred to as bad and terrifying. And you will see this in many instances in the next 2 sections of the Old Testament, as well as all throughout the New Testament. A particular example of this is in Revelation, when you have the beast coming out of the sea. This sea is considered a chaotic place. Another thing is in Psalms, where it's like the seas are over me. It's like these nations are almost drowning me. So you have the nations being equated to raging seas. You also have Christ when he is able to calm the seas. All of that imagery is a very pertinent thought. It's a motif that is maintained. Other motifs that we have talked about: seeing things. When you see something, there are 2 ways that it can happen. The first one is, am I actually seeing things the way that God wants me to see them, or am I seeing things in a way that I desire something? The first example of this is with Eve, but we've already seen traces of this in other examples, such as when, we will be talking about this like in Genesis 6, when the sons of God see the daughters of men. Also, oh my goodness, someone help me here. We've seen this so many times. I've seen it. Potiphar's wife sees Joseph and desires him. You have something like I remember we did something like the Israelites saw the things of the Egyptians, or they saw as something that they wanted. What?
Lot saw that the land was good.
Yeah, Lot saw that the land was good. There is, we talked about this. Believe me, it gets amplified in later sections of Scripture. We have, so usually what it is like, oh, this seems like a good idea, I'm going to go ahead and do it. That's usually the bad way of seeing. Another way of seeing is experiencing. When you see something, you typically see it on an experiential level. An example of this we talked before had to do with Noah's son, and he saw his father's nakedness. We also have another experiential seeing. It's funny because like my mind's drawing a blank on some of these, but we've definitely been covering them. Experiential seeing. We do have like how God saw that the earth was good, or that his creation was good, and it said it 7 times, and the last time was very good. And the first time that something is not good, does anyone remember when that was? First time something is not good. Anyone remember? Off the top of your head.
Man being alone?
Exactly. When man is not alone. It is not good for man to be alone. And that is the absolute first time it's mentioned, and it has a lot of parallels to with Christ being, with Christ in the church as well. It's not good for Christ to be alone. And okay, so I'm kind of backtracking. Oh, another thing, we talked about knowing. Knowing something is very commonly, I would say more than 50% of the time, if he knew his wife, it has to do with sex. I would also say that, like, no, I wouldn't say a lot of the time. It's knowing it has to do with sex, as well as when you know if something is good or bad. And it draws back to the knowledge of the tree of good and evil, or good and bad. And but remember, there's some play on this. We covered recently Jethro is saying that he sees something as good. He says, "Listen to my voice. This is what I know to be good." We were talking, and he said, "But you have to go to God and see if that's really a good idea that I have." Another thing is, like we talked about before, hearing voices, which sounds terrible, but anyway, if you hear God's voice, that is his direction. But if you, in Bible, if anyone hears someone else's voice, it's almost universally bad. An exception to this is Jethro, because he does appeal to God. He says, okay, listen to my voice and go to God about it. But it's usually if you listen to a voice. Examples of this is Adam listened to Eve's voice. Abraham listened to Sarah's voice. And then God says, you can listen to Sarah's voice. Go ahead, because I will fulfill this thing through the way I said it. You have the listening of people's voices is huge. We already talked about that. I'm trying to think, is there anything else before we go further in? Okay, so just as a summary, so we already talked about the Garden of Eden. Then you had, from that, you had this, you had Noah. We talked about the commonalities between that, Gilgamesh, the Atrahasis, all the different creation stories. We also have, so then after Noah's time, you had the Tower of Babel. This is interesting too, but we'll talk about that later, actually. After the Tower of Babel, that's when it zoomed in on Abraham. And through Abraham, remember, God considers his firstborn son to be Isaac, even though Isaac is not truly his firstborn son. And remember the language here. He says your only son, which is clearly not true. But in the way that this story unfolds, he considers Isaac to be his only son in a similar way that we consider he's the only. The way that Hebrew does it is like saying, okay, so this is Isaac here. All the other sons are nothing compared to Isaac. So that's what he meant by your only son. Similar to like how there's no other gods before me, which we will talk about later. Then you also have, through Isaac, you had the story of Jacob. Jacob is absolutely not deserving of what God does, but he promised Abraham. So we had that whole story. We already know the story. It led all the way down to Egypt, and with Joseph. Joseph was considered like the Christ-like figure. And then right at the very end, he fails. And he fails by accumulating wealth and buying people. And that's where he loses his messianic type of flavor, I guess you could say. Then you have Moses. Moses came across, and he had a very messianic flavor. He was equated to God. God told him, you will be like God before Pharaoh, who was also a god. And when they were talking to each other, you have Moses, one god, and you had Pharaoh, the other god, fighting each other. But like, so very much so, his face glowed. He had a glorious presence, all that stuff. Is equating Moses to a Christ-like figure. He fails when he strikes the stone, and he says, do we have to do this? Because he puts himself on the same playing field as Yahweh, and that's a big no-no. And then we have, which is funny, because when Christ does it, it's totally fine. But right? I don't know.
Like, wow.
Well, I mean, Then we have, so through Moses, then we have the laws. Remember, the laws were created in order to ensure that Israel remained separate from all the nations. The other nations had their own beings that kind of ruled over them, but God chose them and said, you are mine, you're going to be separate, you're not going to be like anyone else. By proxy, you are holy. And to be holy, you have to do certain things in order to maintain your holiness. When they broke these codes very quickly, the amount of laws got larger and larger, and so every time they broke it, the amount of laws kind of exponentially increased to the point where you get 611 laws. Remember that the word Torah, that whole weird thing called gematria, which still is something hard for me to get my mind around, but it is absolutely there, because it's funny, because I was actually listening to the Bible Project today, just doing my clothes, and it's so funny because they also mentioned today that David means written out is 14, and we were talking, and I was laughing. It's like, this is too much. It's so funny. It just happened to be in the Bible Project today that I was listening. Anyway, so yeah, Torah is 611 plus 2 additional ones that really aren't commands, but they wanted to make it 613. I forget why, but there was reason to make it 613. But remember, you guys, it's 365 days of the year plus the 260-something parts of the body as were named in ancient times. You had all that stuff all together. And then, so there's a lot of symbolism in a lot of the things going on here. And then we closed with Moses being taken by the Lord in a similar way to Enoch, which we will cover today. So that's everything. Any questions about that? That was just a general overview. Anything? Okay. Let's just go ahead. Oh, yes. Were you going to say something, Linda?
Did you talk about, before I came on, I still am trying to get my arms around the other gods.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up right now. I was just about to go to Psalm 82. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. We were just about to do it.
Okay.
No, what we did before you came on had to do with Eve equating herself to God. And so that we kind of touched it before, but I went into a thicker explanation of why and how, linguistically speaking, she equated herself to God. This is kind of segueing into what we're doing. I was just about to pull it up, Psalm 82. So let me just go ahead here. Okay, we're going to play a game. I would like anyone, I don't care what version it is, I can even start, to read their version, because it's this short psalm, their version of Psalm 82. I can start.
Okay, I can go, Joel, if you want.
I'll go first and you go, okay? 82.
Okay.
A Psalm of Asaph. God presides over heaven's courts. He pronounces judgment on the heavenly beings. How long will you hand down unjust decisions by favoring the wicked? Give justice to the poor and the orphan. Uphold the rights of the oppressed and the destitute. Rescue the poor and helpless. Deliver them from the grasp of evil people. But these oppressors know nothing. They are so ignorant. They wander about in darkness while the whole world is shaken to the core. I say, you are God, but are all children of the Most High. You are all children of the Most High, but you will die like mere mortals and fall like every other ruler. Rise up, O God, and judge the earth, for all the nations belong to you. Go ahead, Dad. Your turn.
Pretty much the same. God stands in the congregation of the mighty. He judges among the gods. How long will you judge unjustly? And show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Defend the poor and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and needy. Deliver the poor and the needy free them from the hands of the wicked. They do not know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are unstable. I said, you are gods, and all of you are the children of the Most High. But you shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all nations.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have a remarkably different version? Okay, does everyone have gods on verse 6? Just questioning that. Mm-hmm. Everyone have gods, verse 6? Yeah. Everyone. I know a couple versions don't, so I just wanted to make sure. And
mine has.
Yes?
Mine has gods, and it also has judges, like it's in brackets.
Okay.
And
yes,
mine
Dad?
also has a footnote. Mine has a footnote. It says Hebrew Elohim, mighty ones. That is the judges.
Okay, cool. And how about in verse 1, where he pronounces judgment on whom? Like, who is the recipient of the judgment? My NLT, New Living, says heavenly beings. What does yours say? Elohim? Yours say Elohim?
Mine said God.
Among the gods, it says
okay.
Elohim.
And what does yours say, Dad?
Gods.
Gods. Okay. All right. This has caused a lot of contention over millennia. So this particular song is often glazed over, often not really talked about, and when it is talked about, there's usually an agenda behind it. And it's funny because I was going over it in church last week, and I said, I was actually refraining from using it in this particular gathering, but I came across it in this book. I keep hearing about it, so I'm like, okay, obviously we're going to talk about it. So yes, this is a very contentious psalm when you get into the nitty-gritty of things. First of all, the one thing that is interesting here is that Yahweh is considered the judge. He is the supreme judge. He's clearly talked about in that way. However, let's go ahead and look at what the Hebrew is saying here, piece by piece. So this, forget that. All right. So God, so this is the name God. It is Elohim. This actually means God as a name. Like how we just say God, even though we could also say gods with a lowercase g. So it's the same thing. So God, right there, takes his stand, or or solidifies himself, I guess you could say, in the congregation of the what? Of the divine. What is the word here in Hebrew? Anyone recognize it from anything? El. And what is the base of Elohim? El. So El is a word, a general term for God. Kind of like how we say like the lowercase g to mean like any of the gods of Greek religion or ancient Greek religion or of other religions. We say lowercase g. This is considered that. It could also be a name. In ancient Israel, there was, when they had a polytheistic structure, I guess you could say. El was one god, Yahweh was another god, Asherah was another god, Baal was another god. So it was, or Baal. So you have El, Baal, Asherah, and Yahweh were the four primary gods. There was also another one over Jerusalem. I forget her name. Begins with an H. But there were four primary gods in ancient Israelite culture. I'm not talking biblical perspective. I'm talking about archaeological perspective. Now, when you have, so this could be a name, might not be. So one of the potential readings is God takes a stand in the congregation of El. I don't think it's saying that. I do believe it's saying of, like, in the godly congregation or the congregation of the divine. I do not believe that angels equate to this. There is a reason I don't believe that, because we're not looking at angels as gods, but yet this is quite clearly a godly, he's definitely presiding over a godly congregation. And this is very quite clear cut, a godly term. There are some places in the Bible where he's referred to as El. My name, Joel, Joel, has that name in it. It's definitely that. What my name actually means is Yahweh is El. That is what it's so cool to actually look at it from that perspective. So anyway, so one thing about Hebrew poetry is Linda, not you, Linda, the other Linda, might remember in Jonah, we talked about parallelism. And so what Hebrew likes to do is repeat things in a slightly nuanced way. For example, there's even I'll just go to Jonah real quick just to use an example. You don't have to turn there. I'm just going to Jonah 3, where there's a very, I guess you could say like a cookie cutter version of a prayer. And yes, I say cookie cutter because I believe it is not a serious prayer. I'm almost there. I have a very teeny Bible with teeny print, so it's hard for me. Okay, there we are. So Jonah 2. Sorry. So an example of parallelism is, I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. So the parallel structure would amplify in the next phrase. I called to you from the land of the dead, and Lord, you heard me. So it's like an amplification of the first thing. I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, and he answered me. Another one. He threw me into the ocean depths, and I sank down to the heart of the sea. So we have, I went to the sea, great depths. Okay, amplified in the next sentence. The mighty waters engulfed me. I was buried beneath your wild and stormy waves. So it's much more intense, right? Same thing here in a positive light. Well, actually, not really. You know what I mean. Same thing. So he takes a stand in the godly congregation among the gods, Elohim, which is exactly the same word as this, but here it is not. It is not definite. We were talking about definite markers and stuff like that, but anyway, woohoo! But anyway, there is no word for God here, and he can't judge himself. It's like you can't have God judging himself. He is judging, and it wouldn't be the gods. It would be God. Among gods, he judges. And it's or in the midst of. This among means in the midst of, nearby, close proximity. Among gods, so he judges gods among gods. So that's clear. So that's an amplification. So then this is him speaking. And he says, until what time will you be unjust judges and show partiality to the wicked? And so he is talking to God, and he says, so how long are you going to be unjust rulers and favor wicked things? If you remember, when we've been talking for this long time here about how kingdoms have strength, they have these rulers that consider themselves gods, that strength is the name of the game. You have these strong armies. You had how the Israelites were afraid of the strong armies of Canaan when they scoped out the land. You have, because according to human thinking, even today, the more weapons you have, the more power you have, the more, all of this stuff, the more accumulated wealth that you have, all of this is considered good. And God says this is not good. You are seeing things as if you're taking from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, and you're doing unrighteousness in that sense. Because when you are grabbing for money, you usually do it unfairly. you put someone else at a lower position. When you are doing these things, for example, I'm just trying to think here. When you're trying to grab power, you usually step on others. And the whole point of justice in the biblical idea is to put everyone on the same playing field. If you remember John the Baptist talking about an earlier section of the Bible saying, all these things will be made, the mountains will be made low. Mountains here are being referenced to these people who think they're so great, or even gods who think they're so great. And this is what God is saying to these gods is, why are you showing partiality to the wicked? Like, why are you helping these people who want to get their own selfish desires, and why are you being unjust when there are people hurting? It's clear that way. Any questions so far? Please ask. This is a difficult section. So.
Yes, I got one for you, Joe.
Yes, please.
Are you saying then that this psalm is referring to the divine council, or are you saying it's another group?
We are, okay.
I thought that might be a tough one.
I know what you're saying. I would say yes and no, and there's a reason I'm saying yes and no. We're going to get to that definitely today. I will say this. Not now. I think he is enacting judgment, and he's saying you are no longer part of my divine counsel. You get what I'm saying there?
Okay, so then are you saying then that they're not the divine council, but they are the principalities?
They were part of the divine council.
No, but I mean, are you saying that these are the people, the beings that God appointed as the principalities of the air to govern the nations and that type of thing?
Yes, absolutely. I absolutely am saying that. Yeah. By the way, your microphone is very distant, but I can hear you. Yes, definitely. Yes, we'll talk about it later. Go ahead.
Okay. No, I had an issue here. I had to get off and get back on because I dropped my audio completely.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I am saying that these are the rulers of the nations. These gods are the gods of the nations, which we will be looking at later on today. But he has apportioned them, all these lands, which we'll get to at the very last verse of this psalm. He has given all these lands to these gods, and he has said, but why is it that in your nations that I have given to you, you are showing partiality to the wicked, and you are judging unjustly? So that's what he's saying right now. Is that answering your question?
Yes. Sorry, it takes a second to get off of mute.
Cool. Yeah, that's what I am saying. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
You're fine. Yeah, I knew that you had it on mute, so I was waiting. You're fine.
Okay.
By the way, so well, we will talk about that when we actually get to Psalms. But anyway, so here it says this is an order, and this is him saying instead of what you are doing, you should be defending the people who are of a lesser advantage. You should be helping the people who are being oppressed. And so it's another example. This is another example of parallelism. So this is happening here. You have 6 words like this, 6 words like this. Do you notice? It's really cool how Hebrew does poetry. So but yeah, it's 6 words. It says basically, my version says, give justice to the poor and the orphan, uphold the rights of the oppressed and the destitute. I love the parallelism of Hebrew. And then here, where it says, okay, so it's talking about the people who are doing horrendous things. They do not, no. So they think they know what is good and what is bad. Just like we're talking about with Pharaoh. Pharaoh quite clearly saw that the killing of babies, or then later on, the other Pharaoh was talking about the oppressing the Israelites even further. This was the Pharaoh's version of seeing good and bad. But the Lord here is saying they don't know anything. And I mean like the gods here. Like these oppressors do not know, nor do they understand. I'm sorry, these are the human one here. They don't know, nor do they understand. They walk about in darkness. Remember Darkness is never called good. When you look at Genesis 1, it is quite clear that the light is good, but there's nothing said about the darkness. And in the darkness, they walk about, they are unstably, they are walking about. Now, so all the what of the earth, they walk about what? I'm sorry, they're not unstably walking. It's the foundations of the earth are unstable. Remember how we talked about the footstool. What it's saying is the four pillars holding up the earth are shaking. Chaos is about to envelop everything by the way that these beings are acting. So here it says, like, these oppressors know nothing. They're so ignorant. They wander about in darkness while the whole world is shaken to the core. I like how this translation says it's being shaken to the core. Yeah, definitely being about to be washed over by this flood of oppression. I guess it's interesting the way that this is being said here. And yeah. All right. I said, God. Remember, this is a general term, not the. So God, you. So it just means you are gods. Oh, very interesting term. It's not just children. It means sons. Well, it can mean children, but usually it just means sons. Anyway, so sons. So remember we were talking about in Genesis 6:1, we have the sons of God. And here, it's just a slight nuance of that. You're the sons of the Most High. And what is God called? He's called the Elohim of Elohim. He's called the Most High. He's called the Lord of Lords. He's called, there's so many ways of saying this. So yes, he is saying that these El that he is among, you are the children. You are my sons. You are the sons of the Most High, which we'll be covering later on in Genesis 6. But you will die like Adam. You will die like men. But it's actually this is actually can be definitely translated as Adam or humanity. And this goes back to the curse that is given in Genesis 3. And it's like you are the sons of God, but yet you will die like men, or the daughters of men. You know what I mean? It's like it's very clear what's being said here. You may think you're immortal, but you will cease to exist. And you shall die like one of the princes. You shall die like men and fall like one of the princes. We're talking about the principalities of the air. And it's like, yeah, you may think that you are that you're so great, but even princes fall, and you are among that. It's like I am equating you to that. So it's definitely not saying that whom he's talking to is not being equated to people. I've come across translations where it is tried to be where it is explained as such, as rulers or as judges, but it's clear that he's saying no. You're like men, and you will die and fall like princes, and you will die like men. Anyway, so this verse 8 is added by the person who wrote it, potentially Asaph, if that is a person. It's debatable. So he says, come on, God, let's go. Come on, God, judge the earth. For you shall what? All nations. If you inherit the nations, why does God have to inherit nations? Like, I mean, we're just talking about what we're talking about. Why would there be inheritance language here?
Because he's given authority to the gods that he gave principalities to.
Right. And when people fall, there's an inheritance. Like when and they're also, like, for example, like say your father dies, for example, you inherit something, or you can, you know what I mean? It's like usually something has to fall for you to inherit it. And so here you have these other gods that are falling, and so God is inheriting all the nations. And God speaks of Israel, we've already talked about it, as his portion as well as his inheritance. This is the one that he called a teeny weeny little nation. He has made his own. And it's funny because he's the God of gods, but he goes in the opposite direction as you would normally expect and chooses like the weakest and the weakest nations. What was it in Deuteronomy 32, where it says, "What other God has done this?" There's like a section where it says, like, "What? Tell me what other gods there are." Here, so hold on. I know it's in 32. I know it's in 32, but I know it basically says, what other gods like chose a nation out of another nation to rescue them? And it's something that he chose, and he inherited them in that sense. That is definitely So overall, what the Bible is saying is you have the God of gods who created, he created everything with the help of his divine counsel. This is where you get the we statements in Genesis 1. The divine counsel is also presented in Job. And so overall this time here, so he creates in Genesis 1, he goes, let us do this, let us do this, let us do this. And we will make man in our own image. So this so far is not bad whatsoever. He says it's good, it's good, it's good. All these times it's good. Then you also have, like in Job, for example, like you have God in the presence of the divine counsel. With Micaiah, which will be in a couple weeks, maybe even next week, you have God saying, "Okay, I want this guy dead. How are you going to do it?" And then you have one of his counsel says, "I know how to do it. I will send a lying spirit to these other prophets." And God says, "Okay, yes, sounds like a good idea. Get it done." So God says, "Yes, this will happen. How are you going to make it happen?" So it's like someone, like a king, basically doing the same thing with council members, or even the president of the United States. If you were to compare it that way, with like how, like, oh, there's something that needs to be done. What advice, what anything like that do you have? When you have Israel being presented here, actually no, I'm not going in order, but the end result of this, if you look at the end of the scripture, this would be right before we take our break, so I'll just say this. So that's how things began, is with the help of the divine counsel, all things were created. At the end of scripture, we, as Christians, join the divine counsel. And the whole purpose of us being with him, remember, where we were talking about how Christ said, where God said it's not good for Adam to be alone. So the same thing for Christ as the new Adam, it's not good for him to be alone. And when you are joined together in one flesh with him, that does mean also that you are being placed like on a, remember before how it was bad to put yourself on an equal playing field. And so, but when you join Christ, he pulls you onto that equal playing field through your humility. And he teaches you throughout the whole process of us becoming closer to him. He teaches you to the point where you are made, through his grace, worthy to join his counsel. That's exactly what the Bible is saying in that regard. We do have to take a break, but we will be going into more reasons why that is being said, or how that's being said when we're done with the break. I'll be back in like about 5 minutes or so, but I do need a breather. So any questions before we start the break? Nope. Good. See you in 5 or so. All right. So while we were in break, Dad brought up a very good part about like in John 10:34, and yes, it is absolutely a reference to what's just been said. And if you read it, it's not contrary to what we've been already talking about, the leaders of people. And so it is interesting when you look at it from that perspective. We are not touching yet when the New Testament. We're going to be mentioning things here and there, but yeah, where John is, or like where Jesus is talking to John. Remember, if you go down a little bit farther than where that is, a little bit further in the text, this is where they try to arrest him as well. One of the places. So.
Or when Paul talks about judging angels.
Yeah, or like, don't you know that we will be also judging angels? So, now, when it comes to the divine council, there are 2 points that I did want to reiterate, and I'm thankful for Mom because she kind of like narrowed my focus. So you remember when we were talking about the creation stories of other cultures, they usually were birthed from chaos. Remember, all the way back when we were talking about Egypt, you had the mound. And then out of the friction, the sexual friction of the mound and the water, came Ptah, and so that birthed him, but there was something else before him. You have other stories as well. You had the cosmic egg that birthed various gods. You had so many different stories. We were talking about all the different creation stories, and universally there was something there. I think there was only one where there was nothing. So when you contrast that with Genesis 1, it's no, God, like Yahweh, creates everything. And if you remember right, he also separates the chaos. He tames chaos. He creates the Tanin on day 4, I think, 4. Where he's populating the skies as well as the seas, and the Tanin are part of the Tanin, these crazy sea dragon creatures that were known as the Lords of Chaos, were inside of the seas. He created them, and yet he still called them good. It's not until later that you have the rebellion, and it's really cool when you look at it from that perspective. Now, when it does come to the rebellion, here we go. Okay, so reiteration. One other thing was Moses. I'm sorry. Moses as well. He was part of the divine council. God gave him that glory. He was absolutely listening to the voice of God, and then he strikes the water and says, "Do we have to do this?" And God says, "Hold on there, buddy." And the whole point of that, yes, thank you, Mom. Yeah, had to do with, he was part of the divine council, but then he rebelled. And so God said, "I'm not having any of this anymore." And that's the whole situation that we're about to encounter with Genesis, early parts of Genesis. You have him creating man and woman. Then you have the serpent that speaks, and she listens to the voice of the serpent. And so she takes that fruit of the knowledge of good and bad, and she sees it as desirable. And by eating it, she gives it to her husband as well, and he eats of it. That is rebellion. That's the beginning. God curses the land. He makes it difficult. He amplifies the pain of childbirth. It says that there was kind of, the implication was that there was pain before, but he makes it quadruply so. And so all that stuff is happening there. Oh, also remember, key point, God created us not to act like animals. That will come later, but I've said it probably 5 times before, but I'm really trying to hammer that point home. We're not to act as animals. So when they ate raw meat, they were acting as animals. Later on, you have Nebuchadnezzar acting as an animal. Similar to Samson. But anyway, we will be talking about other characters in like Joshua and Judges and throughout Kings and Samuel and all that stuff. So, but not now. Now we're going to talk about the divine rebellion. So apparently I lost connection. So we're going to have to look at the exact same stuff that I just talked about.
Okay.
So
but now we can hear your voice.
But now you can hear my voice. So be careful. Make sure you go to God about that one first. So hopefully it stays connected. Please tell me if it doesn't. Type in a chat box like you did before. That way I can know. All right, so I'm going to go really briefly over what's being said here. Okay, so can you guys hear me? Let's just say that before I go further. You guys can hear me right now, correct?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
All right, cool. Awesome, perfect. Let's go ahead and do this. All right, so what's happening here is you have the multiplication of men. This is exactly a parallel to the rhyme that was said in Genesis 1, where you have the rhyming scheme of formlessness and void. It rhymes in Hebrew, and so does be fruitful and multiply. So the men here are definitely multiplying like God said to do. This is not a bad thing. So into them daughters were born. Cool. And then the sons of God, so I took a long time explaining this, so I'll kind of really shortly do this. The sons here are, if you look at Psalm 82, it's the same term. The sons of God, I was talking also about how it's strange that you have the word the there, but you do see it when referring to God's name. So if you are referencing God with a capital G, sometimes you do see the the. And then if you're talking about God in general, sometimes you see the the. It's just exactly the same form. This one is definitely saying, though, if you compare it to Psalm 82, that yes, they're talking about these divine beings that are called gods. Because gods you are, but yet in the council of the sons of the Most High. This is just another way of saying the gods of the other nations, or allocated to the other nations. So these gods saw the daughters of men, and that they were beautiful, and that they took them for themselves. So they saw them as beautiful, and I made a joke here to pun saying, and they saw them as desirable to make them wise. Which is obviously not the case. They saw them as beautiful. And then they took them and ate, they actually just took them for themselves as wives, and they chose whomever they wanted. So God says, my spirit will not strive with them. I took a look at the word here, has to do with, like, I will not be serving as their judge in a sense. I will not even give them the grace of judging them, essentially. It's like I'm done dealing with them. So my spirit will not be with them forever, because they're just flesh. And so we're talking about flesh. It's interesting that in Psalm 82, it says you're going to die just like man. And here God's saying they're just flesh. And then the whole 120 years. And it's interesting. How old was Moses when he died? Another thing, too, is there is, in Genesis, when there's a list of nations, the list of nations is given as, hold on. All right, that was 7 minutes ago. Okay, so you guys can still hear me, I hope. I just saw someone had texted me to say that I was muted, but that was before. So there is a section in Genesis where there's a list of nations. If you count them, there are 70. You also have the quote-unquote 70 sons of Jacob. You have so in a sense, these 70 are replacing the 70 nations. They become the judges of these 70 nations. They're like representatives of sorts. That's more evidence of like divine council talk. However, the Bible doesn't necessarily say that there are only 70 nations. There are sections where it talks about the thousands of thousands, but it is interesting the number play that happens here. So it's interesting that their days will be 120 years, which just is so funny that happens to be the amount of years that Noah lived. Anyway, I don't know necessarily what the correlation is, but there's definitely number play going on there. Okay, so the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. We're almost there. Let me just read this first. Okay. And then after that, wait a second, what? They were on the earth in those days and after that. So, interesting. Like we're talking about, why do they appear in numbers? And there's a debate when it comes to like the word that is being used here, talking about afterwards, and if it's talking about this being related to this or this being related to that. Big debate. I'm not going into it. So but this is a relative particle. It's not really a pronoun. Came the sons of God in to the daughters of men. So they had sex with them. Now, and they bore children, and they bore with them, or children were born. And these, or those actually particularly, became the mighty men of old. So that means, like, you know those legends that you hear about, those people that were so great, like Hercules and all that? Hercules was a later addition, but you know what I'm talking about, like these great men. We were looking at, I think it was Acadia, the Sumer list of all the kings that lived for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it's like the mighty men of old, men of renown. Actually, it means men of what? Does anyone know what that means? That might know. Hashim. I don't know if Dad knows or not.
The only thing I could think of, Joel, is that's the name, isn't it?
That's the name. How do you refer to God in Hebrew?
Yes.
You can say
that's the name. They call it, instead of saying the sacred name, they say the name.
The name. And this is exactly the same way of saying it. So they were men of the name. Which is, again, another way of kind of poking you in the sides and saying men of God or men of the God. But it's like, it's weird because we're not used to thinking this way. And it is definitely a play on words right now. Now, so they bore children and stuff like that. Now, we're going to have a discussion here. Discussion time. We've talked about it before, but now we're going to hit it right in the face. Okay. So we were talking about how in the world could this be? I mean, there's a time like when, something like Jesus said that they're not married, nor will they be given in marriage, and all that stuff. There's also that whole thing about, it's just like why in the world would you have these beings like having sex with humans and all that stuff leading into that? And it's funny because I was already thinking this. I wasn't about to say it, but then this book comes up right out and says it. And I came across it a couple of weeks ago, and I bursted out laughing. So basically what it says is and it isn't strange that we think that, God is born from an immaculate conception. So it's it's really interesting when you think of it that way. Or that Abraham and Sarah have a child when they're so super old. Or when you have, going back to Jesus, it's and yet our entire faith is founded on the concept of this guy that gets born immaculately from the virgin, and that God impregnates her. But yet, no, we can't talk about the concept of these gods having sex with other humans, and God having sex with humans and producing these hybrids. And a couple quick things before we get to the discussion. Gilgamesh is considered two-thirds divine. Yeah, 2/3 divine and 1/3 human. Strange. You would think that if there was that intercourse there, it would be half and half like Hercules is, but Hercules is half and half. Gilgamesh, for some odd reason, is 2/3 divine. And then you have and there's other lists as well, of people being more often than not more on the divine side than not. And the Bible is clearly saying that these beings that other people worship, or these men of renown, these people of the sword. We talked about Lamech in the Song of the Sword. They think they know that these things are good, like being able to count other nations and being on top and all this stuff, but they know nothing. And that's where this is basically, Genesis here is basically saying, yeah, there are other beings that are of great renown. There are other giants, talking about a very tall stature, but they're nothing in compare. Like they're really of the rebellion, and that's all it does. Any conversation from that, like any issues you have with that, any arguments you have to the contrary, this is something that I do believe is worth discussing. So I'm more than open to inciting that discussion.
Just a minor thing, but from a DNA perspective, I could see how that person could have been 3/4 of a god, because his grandparents might have been, there was 4 great-grandparents. 3 of them could have been gods, and 1 of them could have been human.
I love
That's a
it.
technicality, but I think that might work.
How do we come up with 2/3?
I think it's really funny.
You got to, but to prove it, you have to do a DNA test, Joe.
You know, it's sad because what was it? It was when we were doing the Bible read through. There was someone who was talking about the DNA thing, and there's like this whole school of thought that I didn't really know of, and I started digging into. There is a school of thought of people who believe that you have angel DNA that is transmitted through these angels having sex with humans. In my opinion, that's not what the Bible is actually saying, because then they had no concept of DNA. And if, I mean, for crying out loud, if you really want to get down and dirty with it, we have Neanderthal DNA. But like that's like, but that's not even, that has nothing to do with like industrial DNA. But what I'm saying is it takes it to the nth degree to a point. For example, like with numerology, like you can take gematria, and there are some solid examples of gematria, like David being 14, Torah being 611, Solomon being 375, and there being 375 proverbs. But you take it to the nth degree when you start counting every 47th letter. And so what were you saying, Dad? You were saying something?
No, I was just thinking about when you said we have Neanderthal DNA, that maybe that's where the gods were. Maybe they were the Neanderthals, however you say it.
But if you're talking about, but what the Bible is saying, though, is that gods exist. God created them. Our God, like Yahweh, created them. They do exist. And they were allocated to other nations, but they handled them poorly. And they also rebelled against the way Yahweh thought they should rule. And so they formed a coalition and they rebelled. And that, one of the ways that they rebelled, and we'll talk about it later with Babel as well, they also did that. But one of the ways that they rebelled was by seeing women and lusting after them and taking them for themselves. And God said, "What are you doing? Like, this is not good." And then talking about punishing them in the end of that. But I mean, we're going to soon be taking a look at Enoch as well. But go ahead.
There was another thing I was just wondering, when you were talking about they rebelled, were they part of the Satan's rebellion with a third of the angel type thing, or is this something different?
Oh, yeah.
Throw a monkey wrench at you, Joel. Sorry.
No, we'll discuss it. I'm going back and forth in my own personal opinion on something. If you look at when the dragon, the skies, and it was talking about like a division of the stars, which the stars are considered gods in the biblical theology. When he slashes the stars out of
Drew a third of them.
Yeah, drew a third of them out. There is debate that I'm still looking into that I don't want to put my finger on it yet, but I'm also reading that there is more evidence leading toward a future interpretation of that rather than a past interpretation of that. But I can see both.
Yeah, what I'm wondering, what about the demons? They are always referred to as fallen angels. So if that were the same as this divine council that were fallen, or forget about the 1/3 of the angels in Revelation and that. Just talk about in general, because you talk about the demon world is fallen angels, or are you saying there's something different?
Okay, remember in Hebrew there are two instances of the word that is often translated as demon. Two instances there should be, and they only are in the Hebrew Bible twice. In all the Hebrew Bible, they appear like twice in that amount of scripture. Then you have the New Testament comes along, and then you have like so many more references to these daemon, which are I think that's your pronounce it. I haven't studied Greek yet. We'll see. We're gonna preview coming attractions because I really do want to study Greek. I'm right now currently studying Hebrew. But anyway, then you have these demon figures. Yeah, they are called fallen angels or referenced as such in Scripture. Particularly Peter and Jude talk about them as fallen angels. I think even Paul does. And I think also, what was it? Christ. But Christ said, "I have seen Satan fall from the heavens." It's funny because there's an interesting way of looking at that particular verse too. But for example, it's like he says something, and then there's something happen. But what was it? It has to do with John the Baptist, I think, right? When did he say that?
No, you're talking about in John, I think it was, when he says, "I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning."
Yeah, so what happened just before that?
I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm looking for it. But there was something that happened just before that, and if you read it in context, it could very well mean, but it's not even really digging deep, it's very well like, Satan's coming down right now. Like, it's such that, like, something is happening that is a fulfillment of prophecy. And then Christ said, "I'm seeing Satan falling down at this very moment. Like, I've already seen it happen. It's going down right now." And it's really interesting when you look at it, because in a traditional perspective, we look at that and say, "Oh, I saw that way back when." Like, he makes it clear in other passages that he was existing before then, but that particular reference is interesting. Similar to, like, when you look at Lazarus and you think that's a depiction of hell, when it's in the middle of 7 parables, it's really interesting. Right, exactly. When it's in the midst of parables, yet that one has to be the truth. But yeah.
Luke 10:18 is where he says it. "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven, having given you authority to trample over the snakes and scorpions, etc."
Luke 10?
Ask what happened just before that. Oh, that's when he was doing the woes.
He said that as a cycle. And they come back and they say, "Great things have been happening." And Christ is saying, "Yep, Satan's coming down right now." Because they had the power to cast out evil spirits. They had the power to, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Fun.
Okay.
But anyway.
All right, so you're saying that was either present or future, you're saying?
It's potentially present, like, meaning that, like, it's happening, guys. It's happening. All this stuff is coming to fulfillment. I've seen it happen. It's happening. And it's that's how I look at it today. I always had a question about that.
I could see that.
Yeah. But
I could
anyway.
see that in the context, reading it now. All right, I'll shut up.
Yeah, but it's in a similar light. It's in a similar light to Lazarus, and people think, that's a depiction of the afterlife, and it's like, when you're in the middle of 7 parables, that can't be a parable. But it's like flat in the middle of the 7 parables too. But anyway,
well, the thing is, if you look at the Lazarus one, there were so many things that make no sense if you took it literally.
Right.
It's more like, they could see each other. Yeah. Right. It was a
However, I'm going to throw the monkey wrench now. But when you think of his depiction of Lazarus, it doesn't seem too far-fetched anymore when you look at a book such as First Enoch. It's actually, Enoch is a very large collection of materials. It's funny because it does not look like a book of the Bible at all. When you actually, we're going to look at it. When you look at it, the chapters can be super long or super short. the verses are split up in really weird segments, and the reason I say it's weird is because it's like one of these is not like the other. And so the reason I think that this book was not included in the biblical canon, but it was highly, highly, highly regarded by the people of the time. And that's why Jim and Peter referenced it. And I've heard it equated to C.S. Lewis, like how we reference C.S. Lewis today. I tend to disagree because I think that that's too weak of an example. And I was talking with my parents. I'm trying to think, is there anything that we can use that's comparable? And like, yep, the Divine Comedy. A lot of people think that the Divine Comedy is like Dante's Inferno. Okay, like that is a depiction and an accurate depiction of hell, and that you have a lot of imagery that we have in our art and our speaking, in the way that we portray it in media is from the Divine Comedy. And so when you look at it from that perspective, that's the way that Enoch was to the Jewish people at the time. It was like a formative perception maker, I guess you could say. It was a way of establishing a thought that was already there, but giving it that extra artistic edge, I guess you could say. So the very first section of Enoch has to do with Genesis 6 to 11. And it's really cool when you look at it from that perspective. I'm not going. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's show. Go ahead.
When you're ready, I have a throwback to the angel thing.
Please do it now. Yeah.
Okay. I just got this thought, and I was just thinking, and so it's not really gelled, so it's going to be kind of disjointed. But the whole concept of the angel DNA, I'm skeptical of that, because I think perhaps that the angel, or that the Elohim took women, but I'm thinking in the same vein as Jesus, like when Jesus was conceived by the Holy Spirit, his DNA was probably, I mean, in my mind at this point, and I haven't really worked it through, could have been Mary's DNA
Beyond the realm of this study.
Yeah, What I'm saying is I'm having a little bit of difficulty with just accepting angel DNA. But Jesus was not a giant, but he was definitely a man of renown.
Correct. Of the name.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that maybe it was in that relation where that it could be manipulated, like the physical could be manipulated by the spiritual, but you can't, the spiritual and physical.
I get that.
You work from the spiritual works.
Be careful. So I did mention DNA. Notice I am not going into that realm. I am mentioning it.
Right.
Because this is because DNA is beyond the realm of what the scribes knew.
Right.
So what they knew, what they had in front of them in terms of text, was that the sons of God had sex with the daughters of men, and they created men of renown, as well as the great giants and the great, you know what I'm saying there.
Right.
When it gets into DNA, though, and how God might have manipulated marriage, that's beyond the realm of this.
Right, exactly. And that's what I'm saying, though, as far as taking what the scribes were saying, how I'm addressing this is that from the vision of the scribes and what has been interpreted as, a DNA thing, that the scribes were describing something that may not be what's being, I'm just saying.
No, and I'm sorry, that is once again beyond the realm of this study.
Right.
And remember, I said I have to rein it in and keep it within the realm of this study. But I am also reemphasizing too the numerology that can go way too far. The astrology can go way too far.
Yep.
So this whole concept of DNA can easily, and it already has, gone way too far.
Right.
And so that's what we're talking about here is like, okay, what the Bible is actually saying is number play, totally cool. Don't go too far with it. Astrology, totally cool. Don't go too far with it. We were talking about divination. It's cool when you do it God's way. Don't go too far by giving it to other gods. Another thing is witchcraft. It's okay when it's under God, not anywhere else. Can you think of any examples of witchcraft under Yahweh? It's really easy to think about it. Yes.
Yeah, it was Solomon. King Saul brought back Samuel through the witch of Endor.
No. But was that under Yahweh though?
Oh no.
He used the medium, but you're right. He used the medium, but an example of witchcraft that's not the calling of spirit is when Moses threw the staff on the ground and it became the tamid. That is an example of Yahweh's version of witchcraft that is approved in Scripture. So all these things that he tells Israel not to do, like don't perform divination or astrology or call spirits or do these, all of these things, it's totally okay to do when you're following Yahweh. And it's funny, and that's a dangerous, slippery slope. I'm not telling, this is not me saying go perform witchcraft and divination and all that stuff. But it does exist. And when you're looking at in terms of what the Bible is saying, what Dan?
I was just going to say, if God talked to me like he talked to Moses and told me to do it, I think I would do it. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Right. Or if you have like this that could tell us like if God says yes or no on something. Or
right. No, I'm talking about I don't believe there's too many Moseses out there is what I'm trying to tell you. I don't think it's
I disagree. I think what the Bible is saying is that we are very much like Moses when we submit. Like we're very much like Christ when we submit.
No, I'm not. What I'm talking about is throwing down the serpent in front of Pharaoh.
Oh yeah. Oh, not the serpent.
That's what I'm talking.
Come on.
Yeah. Well, right. The rod. He threw his rod down. Yeah. Anyway, we're going off on tangents. I don't mean to.
I love it. Yeah. Just as a clarification, tangents are totally cool. Unfortunately, I have to rein it in when I think it's beyond the scope of the Scribes. So we talked about it from the very beginning. That's unfortunately what we're going to have to just keep doing. Just keep it in the realm of that mentality. But yeah. Okay. Enoch. Let me show. Okay, wait. Anything else before we do Enoch?
It's an after podcast conversation.
We're going to look at Enoch, which is considered by many to be apocryphal. We're going to look at it. So,
I just looked it up. It's not a part. It's not a part of the apocrypha, according to the website I just looked it up.
The Tigrapha. Sorry. The Tigrapha. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully I don't lose connection. Tell me immediately, because I'm about to share my screen, and that's when I lost it last time. Tell me immediately if you don't hear me.
Okay.
Okay, and share. You can hear me, right?
No, I can't hear everything you're saying.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Just making sure. All right, the Book of Enoch. Okay, so this was written in kind of sort of King James English. So we're going to try here. All right, so I'm not going to do the beginning. No. We're going to start at 6. It's interesting enough that it begins in chapter 6, doesn't it? And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. And Sanjaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear ye will not indeed agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. And they all answered him and said, Let us all swear an oath and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. Then swear they all together and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared. Very interesting. Wasn't he the second longest living guy? Okay, 962. I think Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. And they called it Mount Hermon because they had sworn and bound themselves by mutual imprecations upon it. And these are the names of their leaders. I'm not even going to try. These are their chiefs of tens. Not even happening. All right, so we can already see that it's similar. And once again, it's like an artistic addition or interpretation, similar again to the Divine Comedy. There was like a perception of what hell was like, and so when the Divine Comedy was written, it's like it amplified this idea. Also goes back to Hebrew literature, where you amplify certain ideas. So
they only mentioned 19, and they said there were 200.
Yeah, there were the chiefs of 10.
Yeah, so there'd be 190.
Yeah. There was something else, too. There was the other one. This one?
Oh, some Java, maybe.
Yeah. And then you have Sam Lazar as their leader.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Java.
Let's have some bold names there. Okay, anyway. So in all the others, oh, by the way, Enoch was written about 200 years before Christ, 200 to 300 years before Christ. So this is definitely between the Testaments. And all the others, together with them, took unto themselves wives, and each chose for himself one. And they began to go in unto them, and to defile themselves with them. And they taught them charms and enchantments, and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants, whose height was 3,000 ells, who consumed all the acquisitions of men. And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. So remember, this is harkening back to Genesis 1. The birds, the dwellers of the waters above. Then you had the fish, which are mentioned last, right? And then you had the beasts and the reptiles. And to devour one another's flesh and drink what? So then the earth laid accusation against the lawless one. And who? Bringing together some interesting things we've been talking about. And Azazel brought men to make swords. We were talking about the song of the sword, and knives, and shields, and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. Some Jaza taught enchantment and root cutting. That guy, the resolving of enchantment. That guy taught astrology. That guy, the constellations, the knowledge of the clouds, the signs of the earth, the signs of the sun, the course of the moon. We already talked about in Genesis 1 how when God creates the sun, moon, and stars, he said this will be good for the seasons as well as the signs. So we're talking about the astrology here and the signs of the sun. Yeah, and remember where it says, it says, the Bible says, yeah, other people can worship the sun. You don't do it. And the course of the moon. And as men perished, they cried, and their cry went up to heaven. Then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. And they said one to another, the earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their cryings up to the gates of heaven. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men, make their suit, saying, bring our cause before the Most High. And they said to the Lord of the ages, Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, and God of the ages, the throne of thy glory standeth unto all the generations of the ages. And thy name holy and glorious and blessed unto all the ages. Thou hast made all things, and power over all things hast thou. And all things are naked and open in thy sight, and thou seest all things, and nothing can hide itself from thee. Thou seest what Azazel hath done, who hath taught all unrighteousness on earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And Simjaza, to whom thou hast given authority to bear rule over his associates. And they have gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and have slept with the women, and have defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sins. And the women have borne giants. And the whole earth has thereby been filled with blood and unrighteousness. And now, behold, the souls of those who have died are crying and making their suit to the gates of heaven, and their lamentations have ascended and cannot cease because of the lawless deeds which are wrought on the earth. And thou knowest all things before they come to pass, and thou seest these things, and thou dost suffer them. And thou dost not say to us what we are to do to them in regard to these. And then here it goes. This is the whole Noah story. But interesting, watchers. Daniel also calls them watchers. So this is another way of talking about angels. Anyway, so watchers have disclosed and have taught their sons. What? So watchers have sons? And the whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. Remember, the scapegoat goes to Azazel. So this is where we're talking about, okay, is it a plain word from Oz, which can technically mean goat, or is this the name of a being? And then here in Enoch, it's saying it's the name of a being. And by that time that Enoch was written in the intertestamental period, the people have quite clearly thought that this was a being. And remember, Azazel had dominion over the wilderness. And when you send that goat over, sin was granted Azazel. So this is interesting that Enoch is just like an interpretive depiction of this. And so anyway, and the sons of one another, and they sing the destruction of the loved one, bind them fast for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, till the day of their judgment and of their consummation, to the judgment that is forever and ever consummated. In those days they shall be led off to the abyss of fire, and to the torment and prison in which they shall be confined forever. So it's interesting. I'm looking here. There's another part here that I wanted to go over before we stop with this book. And Enoch went and said, Azazel, thou shalt have no peace. A severe sentence has gone forth against thee to put thee in bonds. And thou shalt not have toleration or request granted to thee, because of the unrighteousness which thou hast taught, and because of all the works of godlessness and unrighteousness and sin which thou hast shown to men. That I went and spoke them all together, and they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them. And they besought me to draw up a petition for them, that they might find forgiveness, and to read their petition in the presence of the Lord of heaven. For from thenceforward they could not speak with him, or lift up their eyes to heaven for shame of their sins for which they have been condemned. It's interesting that they're seeing angels depicted in such a way. Oh my goodness. There was a section, though, that talked about Azazel being part of the wilderness. You can read it for yourselves. It does talk about Azazel being the holder of the dominion of the wilderness, and the whole how sin is granted him. But it's not like it's really interesting. We talked about that depiction and how we often think, oh, it's like sin is owed the demonic forces. Like, no, sin is just theirs and theirs alone. Like, sin has no place with humans. It should not have place with humans. And it's interesting with the how that depiction is. In my opinion, it is an artistic depiction of a thought that was already prevailing at this time. And I think it's clear when you look at sections as well. For example, in Deuteronomy, what was it? Deuteronomy 4? Let me check it real quick. And then we'll open discussion one more time. But I want to see where it says in Deuteronomy 4. The rebellion. Oh, I can't find it right now. But there's a section where it talks about like the heavenly rebellion. And we did cover it last week too, so I'm not concerned about that. And then in Genesis 11, when you have the Tower of Babel, when it says at one time all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words, as the people migrated to didn't even mention that today, to the east. We talked about that before, but I'm hammering it home. Going east is like going backwards. It's like you're taking 2 steps forward and 2 steps back, and to them going east is like how we would consider going backwards, degressing rather than progressing. So as the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there. They began saying to each other, let's make bricks and harden them with fire. So we're talking about the brick making thing, all that stuff. Then they said, come, let's build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. So they were making a high place for themselves. And as such, this will make us famous. Let's take a look at what Genesis has to say about that. No, it's brick and mortar, and they said, come with us, let's see it. Let's make it. Hopefully you guys can still hear me. I'm talking. Hopefully you don't lose me this time. But let us make for ourselves a what?
I could hear you.
Okay, good. And what should we make for ourselves?
I haven't got there yet, but I believe it says a name. Make a name for ourselves, right? Yep.
Yeah. Let's make a tower, a high place. And we're talking about the high places.
Do you think that's a takeoff of the name?
Oh, yeah. Let's make
a name versus the name.
Yeah. Less, so that we won't be scattered over the face of all the earth. So we will make a name for ourselves so we won't be scattered. And God says, and I'm going to scatter you.
Well, before this, didn't someplace it talked about go out and fill the earth, and God wanted them to go out and populate the entire world and not be in cities like that. Oh,
that's the other thing. Yes. He says go out, multiply, and fill the earth, and they're saying no, we'll collect ourselves in one single place. Yep. They rebel in that way. Absolutely, they do. Yes, and when they so blah 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 blah. The Lord came down to look at the city. He descends, just like he descends onto Mount Sinai. And the tower people were building, he says, look, the people are united and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they tell us to do will be impossible. Come, let's. So they're still Divine Council members. So it's interesting that it's kind of like fluid here. It's like, okay, did all the Divine Council? This book argues that it's all the Divine Council. I disagree with that, but I think there's room for interpretation.
I think wouldn't there be a heavenly council, a divine council, and maybe an earthly one?
Yeah, when God is saying, let us do this, he's implicating his divine council. And the nations that are allocated, he gives to his divine council. And wait a second. The argument that says that it's his entire divine council rebel, we're about to figure out why they argue that. And I am going back and forth on that, but I don't believe it's his entire divine council. But anyway, so come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages, then they won't be able to understand each other. And that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they started building this city. And so it was Babel, because they're making a play, because it just means like meaningless. Not meaningless. It's just a word, vanity, or something like that. That you can't. Babel is like is a play on words.
Isn't it confusion? Isn't Babel meaning confusion or something?
I know it means something similar to worthlessness. It's like it doesn't have any value. It's something like that.
Okay.
Which is funny because they wanted to build a name for themselves, but yet they don't, and they lose its value. It's funny. Anyway, so the next part was the line of descent from Shem to Abram. If you want to, you can count. It's 70 names. And so the whole, not 70 names. Sorry, was it 70 names? Sorry, no. Oh, yeah, where it goes down. It goes to the line of descent from Shem to Abram, the family of Terah. And it's just like, you got all these names, and it amounts to 70. I remember, even if it's not here, it definitely is later. But there's like a whole list, and it amounts to 70. Now, the argument is, it might be 7, hold on. I might be wrong, or 24, or something like that. But the argument is that when God goes down and says, "Let us scatter them," that at that time the divine council members were still. It's confusing, but that's when they were allotted to govern the nation. I think there's holes in that. Because of the pre- and post-flood implications. But there's also pre- and post-flood implications with the Nephilim. So there's a lot of weird things there. But one thing about the Nephilim, I think that's where we're going to close, is with an interesting depiction of the Nephilim. But I think people want to say something, so I'm ranting. Come on. Say something if you want to say something, because we'll close with some sections of what this book has to say as an argument. So, cricket. So, like, okay.
I think I already said what I was saying.
Oh, right? Okay. I was reading this chapter, and it's really cool. I love the name of the chapter is Giant Problems. But anyway, okay, 185. Okay, so one of the many, okay, so this is an example of one of the pages of this book. So you have the text up here, and then you have the footnotes. So the footnotes can be in your face. So literally. But one thing that's interesting is one of the footnotes, and if you happen to have the book, on page 189, footnote 13, the Hebrew of the phrase in Numbers 13:33, which has to do with the Nephilim appearing then, literally reads that the sons, the B'nai, of Anak were from the Nephilim. The meaning is either that the Anakim were lineal biological descendants, or were viewed as part of a group that descended from the Nephilim. Some have argued that the preposition mean suggests that the Anakim were only like the Nephilim. But there is no clear evidence in the Hebrew Bible for this semantic nuance. As Doak notes in his discussion of the phrase, quote, whatever the case, the Anakim here are most certainly thought to be the physical and thus moral or spiritual descendants of the Nephilim. And it's really interesting. This thing goes really, it talks about the Nephilim before the flood. It talks about them after the flood. It talks about, does it really mean the whole earth? Does it mean only portions of the earth? This book argues that it's only portions of the earth. And they actually have an interesting argument saying that, which I have my own issues with, but in Psalm 104, verse 9, if you want to turn there, Psalm 104, verse 9, I'll read it. I'll just find it because I can easily find it. Psalm 104, verse 9. Cool, there it is. Then you set a firm boundary for the seas, so they would never again cover the earth. And the argument here is that, okay, so this is a creation narrative in that psalm, and that, like, so ever truly cover the earth again. And I'm sitting there going, but you can look at Genesis 1-11 as the entire creation narrative. Anyway, there's a lot of argument, and you can see it's not contentious, that's the wrong word. It's heavily debated. And it's not, and I think the easiest way to say this is there are a few things that when you look at the scripture from the way it really is saying things, there are a few concrete things, such as the sons of God are considered gods in the scripture. That the sons of God are quite, very, very much equated to gods of the other nations. That God appointed them, that they had their ability to rule, but that they lost that ability. And that you have that there is still a divine council. They're still in existence, but it's somewhat altered. There is also that concept that there is a group of people that belong solely to Yahweh, and that people is Israel, and that God had promised Israel's grandfather, that I just wanted to go through he promises his grandfather that he would bless all the nations through Abraham. So there's a double meaning here. So you have Israel is considered the holy of holy people, the holiest of the holy people. So just like you have God is the God of gods. And so they are the holiest of holy. So there's a parallelism here. Because people are made in God's image. So we have that holy right, but we lose it when we sin, and so God is offering his hand out to say, join me. And that's very clear. And the other nations have their own ways of doing things, but God said, you, Israel, will be holy, just like I am holy, even among the gods. So God is the holy of the holies, and Israel is the holy of the nations. And it's an interesting parallel there. Then you have, over time, as the Torah is being shown, you have the struggle, which is what Israel's name means. You have the struggles that Israel has with God because God is trying to make a covenant vow very similarly to a marriage covenant, a marriage vow. And so Israel keeps breaking that vow, and that's why when you have in Ezekiel and Jeremiah him lamenting it, saying it's like you're a prostitute. He equates Israel to a prostitute having cheated on her husband. This is a very much a love covenant that God is establishing. By the end of Deuteronomy, you have Moses dying, and he passes his authority over to Joshua. And this is as they are entering the land of promise, which God has selected a sliver of land out of all of the earth. To them, it was pretty much the center of the earth. And it was, like, if you think of, like, what their perception is of the world, that was pretty much dead center. And so they're being told, this is your place. If you follow my ways, it will be like a central garden, just like the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is depicted as being in a very central location. Same thing with Israel. It's very, very much like a parallel there. In the center of Israel, they are to hold their tabernacle and then later on the temple. That temple, within the center of the temple, is God's divine presence. It's almost like a nuclear, like when you think of a nuclear bomb exploding, or that's a really terrible reference, but like what I'm saying is like you have the center of the center of the center of the center. And it's really beautiful how that's portrayed. And so God's presence is in the center of the center of the center of the center. And then his grace and love and abundance radiates from that point. And the point and purpose of Israel is to be a blessing to all surrounding nations. Should I? No, I'm good. Never mind. Okay. So I was thinking about doing something really interesting, but I'm not even going to do it. There's something I heard before. Okay, I'll say it. So I'll say it really, really fast. 12 tribes. Egyptians were the first culture that I know of. I might be wrong, but I do believe that Egyptians created the concept of the 12 hours of the day. because you had the 12 stages that Ra would travel every day, as well as the 12 stages of the underworld. And so that created a 24-hour time system. So when you have, interesting that Israel is divided into 12 and then sometimes is equated to 24. When you think about it as well from the perspective of like some sort of like shadow-based clock, or like how things go around, or like the cyclical nature of things. Not necessarily of a clock as we see it today, but definitely as like a type of like circular, like the sun does in 12 hours a day type of thing. When you talk about the radiance of Ra going over and traveling the seas above, when you think of Israel in that sense with 12 tribes, where you have the three, and the three, you have very similarly, in a similar concept, the 12 hours of the day that radiate and affect the nations around them. And also notice too that when God's presence is among them, you have the tower of fire, this pillar of fire that radiates during the night and disperses the darkness. It's really interesting stuff. I'm only presenting it because I'm not 100% on it, but it seems pretty like I can go behind it. It's just I haven't really done much digging into it, but there's a lot of stuff going into stuff like that. So, and that, I think that's really what it is like where we're currently at as we're entering the next section of the Hebrew Bible. Remember, there are 3. We've just finished Torah. We're entering the prophets. And as they are looking over the promised land and they're about to enter, will they be the radiating force of good, or will they radiate destruction? And that's where Deuteronomy leads off, and that's where we end for tonight. And please, any more comments or anything like that, point of discussion before we wrap it up and give it to God. Cool. All right. So, oh, by the way, one more thing about the camp. Notice that it's 4 compass directions with 3 in each, and we're talking about the interplay between 4 and 3. But anyway, let's go. All right, let's go ahead and give it to him. This has been fun. So, all right, Father, thanks. This is really... This is cool. I don't know. Like, I just talking about all this stuff, it's just like, wow. Like, you can't stop digging. And the more you dig, the more is there. And you don't even have to go off the deep end. Like, you just, like, stay in the core concrete section of what the Bible's saying. And even that information is endless. And so we come to you and just open our arms and thanks and gratitude, because this isn't stuff that we could have easily had access to several decades ago. This is stuff that is now, thanks to technology, thanks to how we've been developing as an entire world, as the nations that you've been inheriting. Father, now this information that has been in certain pockets of the world is now coming to light and so much more easily accessible, like online. For crying out loud, where could you have gotten the book of Enoch before? But here we are able to look at these things, understand what the people of the time, at least to a certain perspective, were thinking. Father, we come to you just to really thank you that these scriptures have truly stood the test of time and that your truth has really shown forth through them. This has been an amazing experience. Here we are after 12 weeks, and we are now at the end of the Torah. We have done our review, and now we're about to enter the writings of the prophets. So, Father, as we continue, just put your hand of grace upon us, your hand of understanding. May we truly understand and pick from your tree. May we continue to pick from the tree of life, so that you can show us true knowledge and true evil. So we know the difference and know where that narrow path truly is. So, Father, we open our arms to you. We ask your hand of grace as we go about our ways tonight. We ask your hand of understanding, and may we radiate as much as you mean us to radiate whenever we come across anyone throughout our lives. May our joy and excitement about these new things in Scripture that we're discovering truly illuminate our path and illuminate the paths of those around us. We thank you for all things. We thank you for having kept this gathering together, and we put ourselves in your hands eternally. In the name of Jesus Christ, we most humbly pray. Amen.
Amen.
And let me turn off the recording.